It's time for Recipe of the Day. As you know, my parents had Ukrainian restaurants when I was growing up, and they specialized in cabbage rolls, which I'll be telling you about tomorrow, halapchi, and also in pierogis, which is what I'm telling you about today. Now, because we were making these for a restaurant, and there was also like a deli, people could buy dozens of pierogis to take home and cook at home as well. Because of that, we were making a lot of these all the time. We really got to perfect it, like that side-by-side comparison, what worked best, what didn't work, and then over the years learned a lot of great tips. So with my parents' permission, I am sharing their recipe with you and all of these tips. There is quite a bit of information, but I promise that in the end, you will have perfect, wonderful Ukrainian pierogi. A quick note about pronunciation. I am not attempting to use a Ukrainian pronunciation, and really I have quite anglicized pierogis, so has my family. So traditionally, the word pierogi is actually a plural in Ukrainian. So you would say, I love eating pierogi, and that would mean like I love eating pierogis, right? But growing up, we always used the plural, like the English plural pierogis, not the Ukrainian plural pierogi. So one pierogi, two pierogis. And then a note about the filling. So a traditional pierogi filling would usually have either just sauerkraut, potato and sauerkraut, often a like sort of dry cottage cheese or potato and cottage cheese. But what we use is a potato with an orange cheese, cheddar cheese, a nice strong cheese flavor, and it's a smooth texture. But really a lot, or actually all of the tips that I'm going to be giving you and the instructions don't really matter like what kind of filling you use. It's really about the dough and then sealing everything in there and how to cook them and how to freeze them. Because yeah, usually when you make pierogis, you make quite a large batch because they're kind of time consuming. And then you have some for dinner that night. And then you have a freezer full for the weeks ahead. Okay, I'm going to give you a little roadmap of where we're going, the basic steps for making pierogis. First, you are making your dough at least 2 hours ahead. I make it the day before, and then it's refrigerated and rested and rolls out better. Then you're going to make your filling. I tend to peel and cut the potatoes the day before and then refrigerate them in water. And then I just have to boil them and make the filling on the day that I'm making the pierogis. Note that it's easiest to fill the pierogis if the filling is not fridge cold, if it's still like pliable. So that's why I make it on the same day that I'm making the pierogis. Okay, so you have your dough, you have your filling. You're going to roll the dough and cut circles out of it. Then you're filling and sealing the pierogis. Then you boil them, and then either you eat them or you chill them down and then prepare them for freezing. Although there is another way to do this. It's not something that I do, but my friend Keith, we went to high school together. Keith does this other way where you actually freeze them before boiling them, and I got him to tell me what his steps are for doing that, so I will talk about that as well. And yeah, then you freeze them, and then you need to know how to cook them or how to thaw them and warm them once they've been frozen, right? It is quite the procedure, but it is so wonderful when you have like several bags of these in your freezer. They make for quick dinners. They're great side dish for like a big like roast dinner kind of thing or holiday dinners. Wonderful for that. Okay, so this batch of pierogis makes 3 dozen. I will tell you that I usually double it and make 6 dozen at once. Sometimes I triple it, but I'm talking about making 3 dozen. You're going to start, like I said, the day before by making the dough. In a large bowl, mix together 4 cups of all-purpose flour with 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Then you're adding to that 1/4 cup of softened butter. Now, I will say here that I always use softened butter because that's what we used to do at my parents' restaurants. But my mom now says that it works if you melt the butter first and it's actually easier to mix in. So that is a tip that she has learned since the restaurant days. I'll also tell you that she quite likes putting sour cream in her dough instead of the butter and the egg I'm going to tell you about. So you can do, instead of the butter, you could do 1 1/3 cups of sour cream added directly to the flour and salt mixture. And then in a moment, I'm going to be telling you to mix together an egg with water. You will skip the egg and just proceed with the water. Okay, so back to my recipe. It was 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and then 1/4 cup of softened butter that you stir in there, kind of rubbing it between your fingers. You're not trying to keep it like from melting or anything. It doesn't matter. You're just trying to really get it dispersed evenly through the flour. Then you're going to crack an egg into a 2-cup measuring cup and whisk that up. And then you're going to add up enough tepid water. So like lukewarm room temperature, you just don't want it cold and you don't want it hot. You're going to add enough of that water just to make up 2 cups in your measuring cup. Then you'll drizzle half of that mixture into your flour and stir, and then you just keep adding a little bit at a time until a soft dough is formed. It'll be fairly sticky, but not like really, really sticky, okay? You do want a sticky dough. We can always add more flour later. We can't take the flour out, okay? So then you're going to knead the dough for about 10 seconds just to make sure everything is incorporated, and then cut it into 4 equal pieces. And then wrap each piece into a piece of plastic wrap, and then gather your 4 wrapped up pieces and put them into a plastic bag. I use like a zip top bag, and seal that up and put them in the fridge for at least 2 hours, but ideally 8 to 24 hours. It really hydrates the flour and sort of mellows out and gets easier to work with. Now for the filling, like I said, I would peel and cut the potatoes the night before and put them in water, cold water in the fridge overnight. Then I would drain them and add new water and salt, or you can peel and cut the potatoes just before you're ready to use them. So you're going to go with 2 pounds of russet potatoes peeled, and you're going to cut them into 1-inch chunks, and then you put them in a saucepan that they fit in with a teaspoon of salt and enough water just to cover the potatoes. Then you bring that to a boil over high heat, reduce it down to low, and simmer until the potatoes are fork tender, 8 to 10 minutes. Drain them and then put them into a large bowl to mash them up really well. Then to those mashed potatoes, you're adding 3/4 of a cup of shredded cheddar cheese and 1/2 cup of Velveeta. I know that is not traditional at all, but you just get such a like creamy, smooth, cheesy flavor from it. It's amazing. If you don't want to use Velveeta, you can use cream cheese there instead. 1/2 cup and 2 tablespoons of butter, and you stir that all in until it's nice and melted, and then taste it and add salt and pepper to taste. This should be really, really flavorful. Like you can't stop eating it because the dough doesn't really have a lot of flavor to it. Most of the flavor is coming from this filling. So you should taste that and be like, oh, I love this. I just want to eat this for dinner. Who cares about making pierogies? That's how you should feel. Okay, now you're going to want that filling to get cool enough to handle. It can still be warm-ish, but not like hot because you don't want it like melting the butter in the dough, right? So I usually kind of smoosh it to the sides of the bowl so it's going to sort of cool a bit more quickly, but there's a lot of other things to do while that's happening, so it's going to cool down a little bit. You're going to fill a large pot, like 5 to 6 quarts, with water and put it over high heat covered. Once that comes to a boil, you can lower the heat down to just a light simmer because you're going to need it hot later. You're going to want it boiling when you're ready to boil the pierogies, and you don't want to have to wait for it to come to a boil then. So you're kind of just keeping it at a gentle simmer. Then you're also going to line a baking sheet with a clean, lint-free kitchen towel and sprinkle it with flour. This is where you're going to set your pierogies as you fill them, and then you're going to cover them with another towel. And the idea here is to keep them from drying out, but not to give them something to stick to. If you put them straight onto a baking sheet, they can stick to that. So you want that kitchen towel and the flour, and then you get that ready, and it's going to keep them from drying out and stop them from sticking to anything. Okay, then you're also going to put a couple tablespoons of water into a small bowl. You're going to be using this to moisten the edges of your dough to help seal the pierogies. And finally, the last setup step that you need to do is to fill a large pot or bowl or a clean sink with cold water. Now, unless you are eating all of these pierogies right away, which I doubt you're doing, usually you, like I said, package them up for later, or you're like making them earlier in the day for later in the day. So you're going to want to cool them down really well, because if they go into the fridge or freezer while they're still warm, they're going to stick together and then they're more likely to break apart, which we do not want. So you're going to fill that sink or pot with cold tap water, and that'll be used for cooling down the pierogies when they're done boiling. Okay, now we roll out the dough, get out one of those discs of dough from the fridge, leave the rest in the fridge, and dust your counter with a little bit of flour. Put your unwrapped disc of dough on top, dust with a little more flour on top, and I also dust the rolling pin. And then you're rolling that out, flipping it over occasionally until it's about 1/8 of an inch. Now, what I usually do is I actually put the palm of my hand down on the dough and push down gently. It should give the tiniest bit, but I shouldn't be like sinking down into it. So it's not so thin that I'm almost touching the counter or that the dough doesn't have enough to like push on, but not so thick that you can like really push. It is about 1/8 of an inch thick. Then you're going to use a 3-inch diameter round cookie cutter or 3-inch diameter round glass or cup to cut as many circles as possible from the dough. You really want to get them really close together because we're going to gather up those scraps and turn them into a ball, and those go into the fridge for later. And you can use those scraps the first time. So we've rolled out the dough, we've cut the circles, anything that's not a circle, gather up. You can use that now. But you're going to do that with all of your 4 discs of dough total, and you're going to have this little ball of scraps that has been sitting in the fridge waiting for you. And when you cut those into circles, you can't use those scraps again. So the first round we call those re-rolls. The second round we call double re-rolls, and the double re-rolls go into the garbage because the pierogies end up too tough. So you really want to get these circles as close together as possible so that you don't have very many re-rolls and don't have very much waste. So cut those circles, gather up the scraps, gather them into a ball, put them into a little piece of plastic wrap of their own, and tuck them into your zip top bag. You will gather those all up and do those ones up at the end. Okay, now we have our circles ready to make our pierogies. You're going to put one of your cut circles of dough into your non-dominant hand. So that's my left hand. Now, if one side of the dough is stickier than the other, and that does happen quite often, you want it sticky side up. That stickiness is going to help seal the pierogies. So make use of it, right? Okay, so you have the circle, possibly sticky side up in your hand, and you're going to put a tablespoon or so of filling into the center. And then you're going to moisten the index finger of your other hand in that little bowl of water. And you're just going to do like a half moon on the edge of the circle of dough, just on one half around the filling, kind of making a letter C around it there. So we want one half to be moistened on the edge and one half to not be moistened. And this is just because we want it to be slightly damp, but not super wet, right? Okay. And then you're going to bring the unmoistened edge up to meet the moistened edge, and you're going to pinch them together all the way around to make a little half moon. I usually go twice over it. So pinch them all together once and then go again. Now, I talked earlier and briefly about how pierogies can break open, like if they stick together or stick to something, that could cause little holes to form. The problem with those little holes is that when we put these into boiling water, the boiling water gets into the holes and then breaks the pierogi open and it falls apart. You get this like, I don't know, just like the dough, cooked dough, and the filling ends up kind of dispersing and floating in your water. You do not want that. So a lot of the things that we're doing when making pierogies is to prevent that breakage. So definitely making sure that your dough's not so sticky that it's sticking to everything, because then it's going to break apart when you get the little hole. And here, when you're pinching this seal, you want to make sure that it's very well sealed all the way around the filling, and you go twice over it so that you're for sure not going to have that breakage. You also want to make sure that none of the filling has gotten between those two edges that you've pinched together. If the filling is between them, that filling between them hits the boiling water, and then the water takes that filling away and gets into the pierogi and breaks it. Okay, so now you have pinched your pierogi. It does not have any holes in the seam or anywhere else. You put it down on that kitchen towel that you dusted with flour earlier. And you know what? I just want to back up and say I was kind of warning you about the breaking and the sticking and all of that. Using extra flour, it is your friend here. Don't worry about it. When you're first making pierogies, you want to avoid those potential breaks. And so use extra flour to stop things from sticking. Maybe your pierogies will be a tiny bit tougher because of the extra flour, but at least they will all hold together. If you use less flour, you won't have tough pierogi dough, but you might not have pierogies because they'll all be broken open. So just dust everything lightly with flour regularly, keeping it like not from sticking to things, and you'll be fine. Okay, so you put your finished pierogi on the towel line baking sheet and you just continue to do the circles that you already cut from that first piece of dough, adding filling, pinching them, and putting them on that baking sheet, on the towel on the baking sheet, making sure that the pierogis don't touch each other on the baking sheet because you don't want them sticking together. Okay, now you can absolutely do another disc of dough and cut the circles and fill those before you start boiling. But if it took you more than 30 minutes to do that first disc of dough, I say boil those ones because otherwise they're going to start drying out before you get finished the second one. I usually do 2 discs of dough, sometimes 3 at a time before boiling, but I have made very many pierogis in my time and I am pretty fast. Okay, so whether you are ready to boil after the first batch or you've done 2 discs of dough, it is time to boil them. Make sure you have that pot or sink of cold water ready for you. Bring your hot water back up to a boil, and then you're going to transfer your pierogis into that water, picking up 2 or 3 at a time, trying to have them not touch each other as you go, because again, no sticking. And then you're dropping them gently into the boiling water. And after you've added about half of them, give it a gentle stir with a wooden spoon and then add in the rest. I'm saying gentle stir because another thing that can break pierogis is when they're first in the water, they are very delicate. And if you like jab them with the spoon, that will cause a hole in them as well. So you're going just gently like around the very edge outside of the pot, almost moving the water more than you are moving the pierogis. Okay. Once you get them all into the pot, you're going to just stir them gently occasionally, keeping it over high heat until it comes back to a boil. Then drop the temperature down to a simmer and you're cooking them again, stirring occasionally just until some start to float. It'll be about 3 to 5 minutes after the water comes back up to a boil. And at that point, you use a large slotted spoon or a spider strainer to remove any of the pierogis that are floating at the top. Take those out and transfer them to your cold water. And as the pierogis start floating, you just get them all transferred out into that cold water. I will say that if you are planning to eat these right away, like maybe you already boiled all of those 3 first discs full and you're just doing the last ones now to have as dinner tonight, they don't have to go into the cold water. You just want to drain them really well. And then you put them onto your dinner plates with melted butter, sauteed onions, maybe some bacon and sour cream. Some people do dill. You are digging into those. Okay, quickly about freezing the pierogis. Like I said, my friend Keith freezes them raw. So he would be filling them, pinching them, and then lining a baking sheet with wax paper and putting the uncooked pierogis on there in a single layer, making sure they're not touching at all, and freeze them completely solid. Then once they're frozen solid, you transfer them to a freezer bag, and now they'll stay apart. And then when you're ready to cook them, you cook them straight from frozen in boiling water until they come back up to a boil and then float on top, and maybe a little bit extra time then because they were frozen right through in the middle. And Keith says it's 2 to 3 minutes after they've all started floating to the top that you let them continue to simmer before you remove them with the slotted spoon. Now that is not how I freeze pierogis. I do them in 2 different ways depending on how much time I have, how much room I have in my freezer. The first is the like foolproof way for perfect frozen pierogis. You boil them, you cool them as instructed, and then you put them in a strainer and really drain them well. Let all the water drip off of them. Then put them in a bowl with a little bit of oil. It's about 2 tablespoons of oil per dozen pierogis, and that helps to prevent sticking. And then you put those pierogis on the wax paper on a baking sheet in a single layer, not touching. So these are the cooked pierogis going in a single layer like that. Freeze them until they're frozen solid, and then you can transfer them to a freezer bag and put them back into the freezer. The other thing that I tend to do more often is to put the cooled pierogis that I've oiled lightly, same as what I was just saying, into a zip top bag. Maximum 18 pierogis in a gallon-sized bag, and then lay them flat, kind of like spreading them out as best as I can. Lay them flat in the freezer, and then Every like 45 minutes to an hour, you go and give that bag a shake to stop them from freezing together. And then you can stop shaking the bag once they're really frozen on the outsides. They're less likely to stick together. And then you just add more bags to the freezer, kind of shaking them all every now and then until they're all frozen. Now, for those frozen pierogies, the ones that have already been cooked, whether you did them on a baking sheet to freeze or in a bag to freeze, to reheat them, they're already cooked. So you have some options. What I usually do is to cook them straight from frozen by boiling them again. So you bring a big pot of water to the boil, you add the frozen pierogies, stirring gently, and then once they're floating, leave them just like 30 seconds and then transfer them out with the slotted spoon. Alternatively, you can thaw them and microwave them. You can cook them in the air fryer. They get a nice brown crust, or you can pan fry them. Just as they're thawing, just sort of jiggle the bag every now and then, just so that they're not starting to stick together as they're thawing. Okay, I think I'm going to stop now because that was a ton of information. I think this is my longest episode ever of the daily recipe episodes. I will tell you that the recipe for this on cookthestory.com for the homemade pierogies also has a section on keeping pierogies warm for like dinners if you're doing for like Easter or Christmas or something like that, and you want to have them as one of the dishes and you're heating them ahead of time and then keeping them warm. And there's also a whole section on like troubleshooting and tips for preventing breakage in your pierogies, more than what I already told you. So there is tons more information there. If you want to make pierogies, you will be an expert after you listen to this, read that, watch the video that's coming soon. I hope you give these a try. I know it sounds like a lot, but they're really like actually fairly easy to make, just lots of steps, and they're so comforting and delicious and such a wonderful thing to have bags of in the freezer for quick dinners, quick weeknight dinners. They are just the thing. I love them. My kids love them. I know you're going to love them too. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date. So it's helpful to know that today is April 20th of 2025. And yes, that is Easter. Happy Easter. I am Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.